Second year PhD student here at the CRMFP. He is working on Hegel and authority. He is one of the organizers of the event. Well, that's all.
Thank you. Hi. A Lutheran hymn contains the following couplet. O great distress, God himself lies dead. O große Not, Gott selbst liegt tot. It's a Lutheran hymn and not only a Protestant hymn because it takes the side of Orthodox Lutheranism and of Luther in a debate that opposed him to the Swiss Reform movement. Zwingli maintained that only the human nature in Christ died, a version of a heresy that there has been since the beginning. Luther argued that the death of a human would not have been enough to redeem humanity. This debate is concerned with soteriological and Christological questions, that is to say, with conditions for salvation and with the dual nature of Christ. Theologians like Eberhard Jüngel have emphasized the fact that when Hegel speaks of the death of God in faith and knowledge and the phenomenology of spirit that other texts in between, he's appropriating a theological proposition speculatively. From this point of view, it can be astonishing that in half a century, the same formula could come to signify the fact that, quote, the belief in the Christian God has become unbelievable, as Nietzsche wrote in Gay Science 343. And interestingly, in this aphorism and in most of them, he puts God has died in, or God is dead in quotation marks without explaining at all why they're there. One could narrate the sequence as follows, and I'm going to spend the rest of my talk explaining why this narrative is an oversimplification, or why I actually disagree with it entirely. So here's the narrative. Hegel had a deeper understanding of Christian theology than we do today. He nonetheless undermined Christianity in replacing God with the human community or with spirit. The young Hegelians took up Hegel's humanism, but they didn't take the same interest in the theological problems that were still at stake for it in him. Today, the theological meaning of the sentence, God is dead, has been so completely forgotten that readers of Nietzsche don't see the tension in his use of it. So it's Christianity gradually recedes from proximity and is gradually forgotten over the course of the time between 1806 and today. Translated to a biographical scale, this narrative corresponds to what Lukács calls the reactionary legend of Hegel's early theological period. It's enough to leaf through what the editors have titled his early theological writings to see how inappropriate this title is to his writings from 1795 or to 6 in Bern, where he does not really take up theological questions at all. Lukács' proposal was to call this Hegel's Republican period. This is a better label, I think, so long as we are prudent about identifying his Republican ideal with the French Revolution. Obviously, the French Revolution is an important event to understand this period. But there's the same risk of paying too much attention to chronological proximity here. What has been receding from European consciousness since the 18th century is not only Christianity, or maybe not especially Christianity, but rather, in this case, the Republican authors of classical Greece and Rome, whom post-Renaissance Europeans read as their contemporaries. Rousseau's father, for example, began to read him Plutarch's Parallel Lives when he was 9. Here's a quote from him. Constantly busy with Rome and Athens, living, so to speak, with their great men, and born myself the citizen of a republic, Geneva, I believed myself a Greek or a Roman. Hegel's mother, Maria Magdalena Luisa, started teaching him Latin before he was 5 years old, and his early education at a Latin school and then later the gymnasium acquainted him with Livy and Plato. A new mode of historical consciousness has subsequently barred this past. We presume now that the 18th century was closer to the 17th than to the 16th, that the Middle Ages were closer to Hegel than Rome, that Christian theology was a greater concern and more intelligible to him than Greek and Roman religion. Of course, I don't mean Greek and Roman religion as they were in themselves. I mean as they were for Renaissance republicanism. These were not readings of a distant past, however. There were still republics in Hegel's world, quite apart from the French Revolution, like the Dutch Republic, Venice, Geneva, and the Florentine Republic was still a very vivid memory. So in this barren period, Hegel conceives of ancient and modern republics alike under the sign of an identical political principle which Montesquieu called virtue. A continual preference for the public interest over one's own. That's a quote from Montesquieu. Transposing this definition into post-Kantian terms, Hegel writes, virtue, which Montesquieu makes the principle of a republican regime, is readiness to sacrifice one's life for an idea realized for republicans in their country. I think the word idea is what he has introduced in order to translate this to the 1790s. Now, in this period of Hegel's thinking, and actually for the rest of his life, the anti-republican regime par excellence is not monarchy, but, and even though it's the empire, what is characteristic of the empire is individualism and private property. When political freedom vanished, Hegel writes, the citizen's right gave him only the security of that property which now filled his entire world. Death must have become something terrifying, since nothing survived him. But the Republican's whole soul was in the Republic. It could hardly have struck him to ask for persistence or eternal life for his individuality. Cato turned to Plato's Phaedo only when his world, his republic, hitherto the highest order of things in his eyes, had been destroyed. At that point only did he take flight to a higher order still. So in this fragment from 1796, Hegel understands both the decline of pagan religion and the emergence of Christianity in terms of the loss of the republic. It's to say that the content of every religion that Hegel is interested in this period is either the republic or its loss. You could say on this map that he is interested in back and forth between life and authority, and that truth plays no role at that point, if I'm understanding correctly. Now's the difficult part, because I'm going to talk about the phenomenology of spirit, and I will try to make some kind of exposition of the words that I have to presuppose. I'm talking about the end of the book, so I also have to make some kind of exposition of things that came earlier. But in general, by the time that he writes the phenomenology, Hegel has deepened this loss, the loss of the republic. Because it's not just an accident. Previously, he explained the loss of pagan religion by the loss of freedom, but he did not explain the loss of freedom. That's because the republic was a political principle that he did not see as being refuted. He saw it as constantly reactualized in different struggles around him. And his project was precisely to repurpose European religions as the foundations for a new republic. But in the phenomenology, instead of identifying republican virtue with Antigone's unwritten law, which is an unauthoritative, non-positive law, he sees the conflict between Antigone and Creon in the republic itself. This presentation doesn't narrate the decline of classical Greece as a particular culture in time and space. It demonstrates to him the impossibility of a republic. That means that we should be especially careful with the conceptual apparatus that he deploys in the chapter on ethical spirit. Universality, singularity, the tension between consciousness and self-consciousness. Because all of these terms may already be smuggling in anti-republican or individualist premises that then he can use to demonstrate through this kind of narration of Antigone why a republic is impossible. But it's also a more profound problematization of it than he was able to make before. Now, this whole dialectic occurs in spirit, which considers a series of shapes of a kind of subject-object. Spirit has already somehow overcome the properly phenomenological dialectic, which is about trying to know the object. In spirit, what is under consideration is a subject-object unity, and each form that it takes as it is destabilized by its internal contradictions. It's still, the subject-object unity is still it's still a knowledge, but it's not really being considered as a knowledge of an object. It's being considered as a world that is a knowledge. The funny thing is that following this chapter, he thinks that he needs to reintroduce a division between consciousness and its object again, after having overcome it. So we get a chapter on religion, which is concerned with the knowledge of the subject-object as an object. Just seems to be a kind of superfluous introduction to some extent, but it gives him the chance. It gives him the chance to gives him the distance between these terms that allows him to introduce finally the problematic of Republican religion again. Because so why he uses religion? This I'm skipping, which is why I'm sort of forgetting what I have to say. That means that religion is knowledge of the spiritual world as an object. So you have something here, I would say it's a little bit like Durkheim's sociology of religion. Or in other words, he understands religion as civil religion throughout this chapter. Now, one thing that is especially surprising about it is that although he has decided to rerun the dialectic of spirit a second time on the basis of this strange and spurious new reintroduction of distance, he only gets to the end of the first subsection of spirit. Whereas spirit was 234 paragraphs, only the first 40 had anything to do with the Republic and its loss in empire. By the end of the religion chapter, all that Hegel has dealt with is the Republic and the loss of empire. So here's where finally the death of God appears. It appears precisely at the transition between art religion and revealed religion, or between ethical spirit, the Republic that's lost, and the state of legality that replaces it. And when it first appears, it refers to two things. Quote, the ethical world and its religion have sunk into comic consciousness, the unhappy consciousness, and the unhappy consciousness is the knowledge of its complete loss. This unhappy consciousness is the loss of substance as well as of the self, the pain that expresses itself in the harsh phrase that God has died, which is in italics, which is a way of putting it in quotation. To some extent, this follows a familiar pattern from the phenomenology of spirit. A dialectical loss is now re-experienced as a new object. Ethical spirit liquidated itself into private property, encounters this self-liquidation as a new object, a new God. But there's an extra turn of the screw because revealed religion experiences this loss as if it were spirit's own act, an act of self-sacrifice, rather than something that happened to spirit. Nonetheless, this whole experience of the loss of the Republic is taking place in the wrong chapter. Ordinarily, each shape of religion would be working through the loss of the previous shape of religion. But we're working through the loss of a shape of spirit from 230 paragraphs earlier in the book. And this is no longer the place that can be remedied. That means that revealed religion is not a way of getting back to the Republic, although the content of revealed religion is the loss of the Republic. So, one little coda on that, and that's the end. There is somehow a way of getting back the religion of the Republic in revealed religion. And what's characteristic of the religion of the Republic, from Hegel's early writings to later writings, is that the citizens are active in the republics. Their product is not alienated from their action. They recognize the Republic as their own deed. It doesn't confront them as something foreign. And the same is true for Republican religion in the chapter in the Phenomenology of Spirit, which is why it's art religion. However, the deed that they recognize in this kind of divine product of their collective making, the deed at stake is a making of something. And the problem is that when you make something, you remain outside of the making as a kind of stable substratum that contains this activity in it. without losing itself in the activity. Whereas the thing that you're making then is an accident that depends on you, and moreover lacks any kind of self-activity. This is why we end up with comic consciousness, what he calls comic consciousness, which is the consciousness that says something vaguely like, I made this world. I is what ultimately matters in it. Nothing else is capable of making itself, and everything other than I could have been made otherwise. That's the ambiguity in Republican religion, or in the art religion, the religion of ethical spirit in the phenomenology, is that at the same time, it's a religion that follows the Republican principle of non-alienated participation in the communal production, but for this very reason, it declines into a kind of individualism, and then romantic irony is its outcome. Christianity at least is able to solve something about this problem. I have only 2 or 3 sentences to go. I know I'm over by 30 seconds. Because the object of revealed religion, I shouldn't say Christian, the object of revealed religion is the substance that sacrifices itself, or the God whose act is one of self-renunciation. It ends up stuck in a kind of passivity with respect to this drama. It can only receive. It isn't active in the divine drama because the self-sacrifice happened by itself. Unlike in Greece, where Demeter was sacrificed by the participants in the mysteries. That leads to this bad situation from Hegel's point of view that revealed religion leads you to wait for redemption because the reconciliation is not your doing. So you can only, you don't participate in it, and your present doesn't participate in it. That leads you to retreat into the future. But it prepares for the next step, which is absolute knowing. All that's left to do is to participate in it with an act that is no longer a making, but resembles much more the act that is intuited on the level of God, the absolute spirit, which is to say that your participation should also become a self-renunciation, which is what we properly mean by act, as opposed to being a making, as it is in art religion. So in that sense, but only in that sense, does it recuperate something from Republican religion. Unfortunately, no conclusions can fit.
I want to apologize because I didn't mention the title of the presentation, so I think it might be nice before the Q&A. World Lost and Its Religion, the Death of God between Hegel and Hellenism. Are there any, I think there might be some questions to this presentation.
Or objections to my
comments?
Dare I?
Yes, of course.
Thank you so much. I mean, rereading these developments in Hegel always leads to extraordinary speculative and also historical. What surprises me, I put it very brutally, is that you explain beautifully, if I were to understand, that the question of the impossibility of the republic, of the impossibility of a religion that coincides with the self-making of the political community, or etc. The Rousseauist dream that Hegel remains the problem with which the phenomenology deals with until the end. And therefore, in a sense, the chapter on revealed religion, manifested religion of Dubois, etc., is no real overcoming of that. It's just a new formulation. So maybe I didn't understand well, but because of the Lutheran reference to the hymn and all that, my objection would be simply there seems to be no specific room in your description for Hegel's interpretation of the resurrection in terms, so this formula is not in the phenomenology where you would expect it, but it's virtually there, and it comes in the philosophy of religion, and it has the same Lutheran radical origin, the death of death, todes des Todes. So that's something that, if I well understand, Hegel ascribes to the Christian Lutheran understanding of negativity, which was not there in the Republican civic problematic. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes. Well, the Christian theological proposition of the death of God isn't just the loss of the Republic. It's not. The Republic is lost. But it's what allows him to make revealed religion into a way of dealing with the loss of the Republic. It's true that so I see it as what he finds in Christian dogmatic theology that allows him to connect it to what is at stake.
I mean, if I'm allowed, the idea would be that when he gets to this idea, but interestingly, he doesn't use very much the word resurrection. He translates that into speculative language, but it eventually becomes death of death. I mean, and that's the negativity at its purest, so to speak. So it's getting closer to an idea of the spirit than anything that had been proposed before, in his view. And in the absolute knowledge, in a sense, this will only become repeated, except very enigmatic idea and difficult for all of us. He will say that now we are overcoming the element of representation. So we no longer have to think of that negativity in representative terms. We can, so to speak, get to its concept. Sorry.
It's a fair objection.
Any other question? Peter.
Thanks, Austin. What happens after the end, so to speak? Because you come through the Spirit sacrificing itself, crucifying itself, resurrecting itself, but always in this logic of overcoming and self-renouncing. And that gives you a criterion that Hegel will then use to in a sense, to affirm the privilege of Christianity in relation to other religions which fail to do that. And how far do you, what is your own view of that? In what sense is Hegel, in his own peculiar way, but reasserting the privilege of this Christian logic in relation to, say, the religions of Africa, parts of Asia?
Yes, well, the religions of so they're also there in the religion chapter, which they weren't in the spirit chapter. The religion chapter begins with cultures that are not mentioned earlier in the book. Can we not stick to the Republic? I mean, yes, of course, but the problem here that I'm trying to emphasize is the relationship between the Republic and this overcoming by Christianity, which is already a problem. We don't have to go to his Eurocentrism. We can also ask about it here, because both of them are there's a lot of negativity in both of those religions. In the Republican religion as well, it's a religion that ends with some kind of nihilism and irony. My intention here is not to defend revealed religion as the best religion, or to deny that the Republic is possible, or to claim that even the Republic is better than some other option. It's just to try to present a counter history of this secularization sequence going from Hegel to Nietzsche, in which the element of the Republican anchorage of Hegel's philosophy of religion is emphasized, rather than some kind of presumed proximity to Christianity, which I think is the homogeneously presumed because these other references are no longer part of cultural life. Doesn't mean that the Renaissance motifs are somehow better than if Hegel had been Christian.
I think we don't have time for any other question. Thank you, Austin. Our third speaker of this first panel is Jacob Kowalewski. He recently obtained his PhD in philosophy from the University of Essex. His thesis studied the relationship between self-awareness and ethics in the phenomenological tradition. Other of his research interests involve political philosophy, aesthetics, and the history of philosophy. And this year, Jacob taught at the University of Winchester. He will be presenting a paper titled "After the End of a Certain World, Apocalyptic Prophecy as a Political Critique in Maimonides, the Guide of the Perplexed."
Thank you. So, first of all, thank you to the organizers for the conference. Secondly, my contract in Winchester is running out, so if anyone wants to offer me a job, I'm free. Okay, so thirdly, I want to start with a bit of a confession. So this paper was initially intended to explain Maimonides' account of prophecy, and especially apocalyptic prophecy, by drawing on the writings of Bakunin, who, as I'm sure you know, is a 19th century Russian anarchist. My intuition was that Maimonides, a medieval Jewish scholar from Cordoba, is in effect a hardcore anarchist, or at least